So we're talking with Sean Cudden. He's in Glasgow, Scotland. And thank you for taking the time to talk today, Sean.
No problem.
So I wanted to get some kind of review of what's happening in British politics today. And obviously, Scotland is in some ways a bit of an outlier, from the
Yeah.
mainstream of British politics. And it would be good to get into that. But maybe we can start with just talking about right now the Labour Party is in power under Keir Starmer. Would you talk a little bit about that, Sean?
Um, well, Labour is at the moment incredibly unpopular. They won a huge landslide victory last year, but I think currently they're sitting at something like 18% in the polls. They're facing, if that remains the case, they're facing a huge meltdown at the next election. Personally, I don't think it will remain like that. I mean, at the moment, both Labour and the Conservatives are very, very low in the polls, and it's really unusual for both of them to be so badly led. So I expect at least one of them will get their act together at some point. But at the moment, it's really bad for Labour. It's looking really, really terrible. And they've got themselves involved in a very strange situation with a group called Palestine Action, which they have decided is a terrorist organisation and outlawed. And there have been protests, I think, weekly in London by supporters of Palestine Action, and they're arresting hundreds of people they've arrested just because they support Palestine Action. So it looks like they're bleeding support to the left because of that. Meanwhile, they're bleeding support to the right to reform. So both Reform and the Green Party are doing very well in the polls. So Labour are stuck in this strange position of losing support to both left and right simultaneously, and they don't seem to have any idea on how to stop that.
So, and how about their policies as far as the NHS and social services and that sort of thing?
So far, they've just sort of carried on with things as they were under the previous Conservative government. The NHS for Labour is a kind of it's a sacred cow because Labour created the NHS, so they will only go so far in terms of allowing private companies to get involved with the NHS, and there's definitely a private element involved in terms of contractors and suppliers and so on. They're comfortable with that, but I don't think they'll go any further than that, even with Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, because I think it's part of the mythos of the Labour Party that they created the NHS. It's an extremely popular institution, and it would be a huge. They'd be shooting themselves in the foot if they attacked the NHS. In terms of what I think is a really huge issue in the UK that has been overlooked for a long time, which is housing, they have made some attempt to encourage the private sector to build housing, but what needs to be done is that social housing needs to be built at scale, and none of the mainstream parties want to touch that.
So, like for the average, for most of the British workers who traditionally vote Labour, are they losing support from them? And if so, is it around the Palestine issue or other issues?
They really lost a huge amount of support in England back in 2019. That was basically Labour has four historic strongholds: the north of England, Scotland, Wales, especially North Wales, and the more working class parts of London. Really, the only one they had left in 2019, well, they had two left in 2019, and that was the north of England and Wales. And in the north of England, they got annihilated, and that was really around Brexit. So they're in a weird position where they have two main constituencies now. One is a sort of middle class left in London, and the other is the traditional working class vote. The middle class left in London were against Brexit. The working class in the north of England, the working class in the north of England were for Brexit. Labour took the position of being against Brexit, so their support in the north of England just evaporated in 2019, and the Conservatives won in a traditional Labour heartland. They won on a huge scale. Labour took a lot of that back in 2024, but that was mainly due to the fact that the Conservatives were incompetent and corrupt. They're very much seen as incompetent and corrupt by a lot of the people who had switched to them. So at the moment, the north of England is kind of, it's up for grabs, which really just leaves them with, in terms of their traditional heartlands, just Wales, because they lost Scotland to the Scottish National Party years ago. So only Wales is left, and there was a couple of midterm elections there just a couple of weeks ago, and Labour did very badly, losing to the Welsh Nationalists, and Reform did quite well. I don't think Reform won anything, but they did quite well in terms of vote share. So they don't have any problems to seek Labour. They're losing votes to Welsh Nationalists, Scottish Nationalists, Reform, the Green Party, basically losing votes to almost everybody.
So let's talk a little bit about the Reform. And I've seen some predictions that Reform will come out on top in the next election. So number one, do you agree with that? And also maybe you could explain for American workers what Reform UK is and who Nigel Farage is.
Right. Well, first of all, Farage predates Reform. So he came onto the scene, probably about 20 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago. He created a party called UKIP, which is the United Kingdom Independence Party. And they were a driving force in pushing for Britain to leave the European Union. They didn't do well in British elections, but elections to the European Parliament, which they wanted to get out of, they did very well. And Farage was actually elected to the European Parliament. At that point, he was still seen as a sort of fringe figure. He was often laughed at in the European Parliament because it was clear that he was there just to disrupt. But they had enough support on that one issue that they really put leaving the European Union on the agenda. After the Brexit vote, Farage stuck with UKIP for 2 or 3 years before finally leaving, because he apparently thought that they had gone too far to the right, which might surprise some people who assume that Farage is himself on the far right. He left in 2018, and then he founded Reform. Since then, UKIP has become what a lot of people thought it was, which is a kind of fringe far right, if not outright Nazi party, then on its way there. But that has become an irrelevance, really, and Reform has taken over. So UKIP back in, when was that election? 2015, I think. UKIP got about 12 or 13% of the vote, but they only got one seat in the UK Parliament. Reform now is on more than double what UKIP got back then. So if they hold on to that 30-ish%, in recent elections, 32 to 34% would get you pretty decent, should get you a pretty decent majority, because the old two-party system is broken down to the extent that a few decades ago you would need 40-45% to get a big majority. Now Starmer got a huge majority with, I think, 34%, and it is a really big majority. So could UKIP win the election with 30%? Yeah, I think they could.
You said with
that would.
You said.
Sorry.
You said 30%.
30%, yeah.
50, 50. Okay.
No, 3-0. Sorry, it's my accent.
I know. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure I
It's okay.
got it right. Yeah.
So with the basically just under a third of the vote, I'll put it that way because it's easier to understand. Um, with just under a third of the vote, Reform could win the election, but as I mentioned before, Labour and the Conservatives have historically bad leadership, and I really don't think that will last. There's already talk about a leadership challenge in the Conservative Party. In fact, it's never really gone away since the last leadership election. And Keir Starmer's position is looking weak in the Labour Party as well. So it's possible that he could face a challenge. I just don't see both of those parties going into the 2029 election in the state that they're in now. One of them maybe, but both, I just don't see it. So I think most likely we'll see a Labour Reform head to head in the 2029 election. It's possible the Conservative Party could get their act together, in which case Reform would then have a challenge from both Labour to the left and the Conservatives on the same sort of ground as them.
And so I know that Trump here, supports Farage and Reform. Can you describe a little bit more about like what their politics are, and would Farage and would Reform be roughly comparable to the policies of Trump over here?
It's hard to tell because they only really have one policy. They're a one-issue party, and that is immigration. They talk about other things from time to time. Farage is known to be sceptical when it comes to the NHS. He's on a personal basis raised the possibility of a private insurance system to replace it, which did not go down well, and it's not, as far as I'm aware, Reform policy. But they don't really seem to have in-depth policies, and that's another reason why I think 2029 is too far away for us to judge whether Reform will win or not, because they've never really come under any real scrutiny from the media. Farage is seen as a sort of character, and all the attention has been on Farage on a sort of personal level. Once we get closer to the election, I think even Britain's media, it's not great, but there are rules around elections. They have to have a degree of scrutiny of policies. They have to have a degree of balance between political parties. And I think at that point, probably before then, but certainly by that point, there'll be enough scrutiny of the policies that the NHS at least will become an issue for them, a problem for them. But Farage is an opportunist. So last year, I think it was, or the start of this year, there's a big iron foundry in the north of England, and it's the last major one in England, and it was about to be closed down by its owners, and Farage called for it to be nationalised, which on the right, you don't get people calling for nationalisation on the right. So he read the mood. He wants the north of England, and this foundry is in the north of England. It's part of that working class heartland that Labour used to own, that is now up for grabs. And I think Farage saw that as an opportunity to win some support there, get his name mentioned in a context that people weren't used to, as a friend of the worker, that kind of thing. Whether he meant it or not, people can make up their own minds, but it did push the Labour government to ban the sale of it, and it hasn't closed down yet. So it was kind of a partial victory for Farage, although he may have painted himself into a corner with it, because people in that region at least will expect certain things from him now that they wouldn't have in the past.
As I understand it, Farage calls for an end to British support for Ukraine. And also there's been some scandals involved in that with that guy Gill.
Yeah.
I think also Russia helped finance the Brexit campaign. So can you talk a little bit about that whole issue and how that, you know,
Mm.
how that interjects itself into British politics, in particular with Farage and reform?
Yeah. Um, I'm not sure about reform policy. Again, Farage says a lot of things in a personal capacity, so sometimes it's unclear if he's talking as a person or as the leader of a party. But certainly he has made comments exhibiting exhibiting some scepticism about Britain's support for Ukraine. And yeah, there's what's his name, Gill from I think he was the leader of Reform in Wales, has just been found guilty of receiving bribes. So broadly
From
speaking,
Russia.
yeah, yeah. So he's actually I don't know what the sentence is, but he's been found guilty. Um, I think he's looking at jail time, which would be good. But Farage himself has kind of stayed out of that so far. He hasn't been too badly affected by it. There's a lot of support for Ukraine in Britain, but there are a lot of sceptics too. So far, I think Farage has been hedging his bets, or at least Reform has hedged its bets by not being too anti-Ukraine or too pro-Ukraine. They've to a large extent sat on the fence. Although yes, Farage in a personal capacity has made some remarks, I think, about how much it's costing and not making Russia our enemy, that sort of thing. But again, it's very difficult to tell with Reform because they don't really have a well worked out agenda, and all they ever seem to want to talk about is immigration because that's where they get their support, really.
I read a little bit um, just recently about stuff that's come out where Farage, as a teenager up until like 18 years old or so, was
Yeah.
kind of making racist comments and anti-Semitic comments and so on. Can you explain that a little bit? And also, has that had an impact on his popularity?
It's difficult to tell if it's had an impact on his popularity yet because these stories only really came out, I think it was last week. They got a lot of publicity. I'm not sure if the accusations were
Ugly
made a while
stuff,
back.
really ugly stuff he was saying.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
Nazi and
Mm. Farage, as a young man, was connected to the far right. He was there are pictures around that show him on Nazi marches. I can't remember if it was the National Front in the 70s or the British National Party in the 80s, but he did spend a little bit of time in contact with those people. So that ties in with that. What he said at school ties in with that. But this actually goes back to what I said before about him never really coming under scrutiny. Last week, when the media had a go at him on this, it was really the first time I'd ever seen a kind of sustained questioning that made him uncomfortable. And that's why I think the British media are kind of like hyenas. The moment they sense blood, they start to turn, and that might be the moment. It might be too soon to say that, but it's possible it could be the moment that they start to think, okay, maybe we've been nice enough to this guy. Maybe it's time to give him a hard time. They can turn quite rapidly, and it is a kind of pack mentality with the British media. Even though that there are left-wing newspapers and right-wing newspapers, and they do have different agendas, they will often attack the same individual, but for different reasons. So once they turn on Farage, they will really turn on him, and it won't just be the newspapers. It will be increased scrutiny from TV channels as well. To what extent that matters in an age when social media is so powerful, I'm not sure, but it could certainly do him damage. And it's, as I say, it's really the first time that he's come under real scrutiny, even though he's been around for 15, 20 years. I've never seen him undergo that kind of scrutiny. It seems to have dropped off now, so it was only a few days, but it might be the start of something. We'll see.
So let's talk a little bit about the Green Party, and just for Americans that may not know, the British Greens is different from here because, for one thing, it's actually a membership party in Britain, which is not here. And as I understand it, like if you belong to the Green Party, there'd be membership meetings you could go to and that sort of thing. Is that right? So
Yeah.
just with that understanding of the difference, talk a little bit about the Green Party. For one thing, as I understand it, they support Ukraine, which they do not here. But in general, talk a little bit about where their support comes from, and what perspectives you see for the Green Party.
For a long time, the Green Party had very minimal representation. In fact, they've still got very minimal representation in any elected bodies. There are one or two places in England, I think Brighton, for example, they do well. They seem to, I don't know what it is about that particular town, but they've had quite a strong support there for a very long time. They've usually only got one or two MPs, and one of them is always from Brighton, and they've always got good representation on the council there. But their support nationally is usually around about 4 or 5%. But there was a leadership election just a few months ago, and since then their support has grown. I think they're up at something like 15 or 16% now nationally. The new leader, Zach Polanski, has very much tapped into the kind of young left-wing voters that you might expect Labour to have got in the past, or Jeremy Corbyn's group to get now. He's been very successful in connecting with them in a really short space of time. So yeah, their support in the polls has tripled in the space of just 2 or 3 months. As I said earlier, I think that there's the potential for some of Labour's middle class left vote to go green. They're very popular at the moment among students too. Whether they've got any big support among the working class, I think they certainly didn't have. But under Polanski, maybe that could change, because he is more interested in social issues. It wouldn't surprise me if things like housing and minimum wage and things like that were on their agenda now with him in charge. And yeah, he's quite pro-Ukraine as well. I think the Greens have always been supportive of Ukraine, though, so I don't think that's a big change for them.
And then there's this new party, which up until now has been your party, of Sultana and Corbyn.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that? And also, just to make it clear for people, as I understand it, both Corbyn and Sultana have called for an end to British support for Ukraine.
I'm not sure about Corbyn. Sultana has quite vocally. But your party, as it's still called, have officially, that was supposed to be the working title until they voted on a name, but I think today or yesterday they voted at conference to actually confirm that it's going to be called Your Party. But their conference has been a bit of a shambles. It's been extremely acrimonious. A lot of far left activists have been kicked out. But there seems to be a kind of a split already in the party, which is really fast. I mean, the left is good at splits, but your party seem to have split before they even were officially founded. When it was Sultana who announced that your party was going to be a thing a few months ago, and immediately Jeremy Corbyn said, no, we haven't formed a party, we're in talks to form a party. So even announcing that they were going to have a party produced an argument between Sultana and Corbyn, and it hasn't gotten much better. The positive thing about Sultana, I mean, I definitely disagree with her on Ukraine, obviously, but the positive from her is that she thinks the party should be very much membership-led. There seems to be another group in the party who are against that, and they think that there should be a leader or some sort of strong centralised leadership. I don't know if that's Corbyn though, because Corbyn in the Labour Party, when he was the leader of the Labour Party, he was very much in tune with the membership and wanted the membership to direct things to some extent. But for a party that has only just been formed, it already has a very powerful bureaucracy, which is really surprising. It's a powerful bureaucracy in terms of disciplining the membership, but it seems to be a really inept bureaucracy as well in every other sense. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's stillborn, but it doesn't look good for that party. And as I said about Zach Polanski, he has already moved into the kind of territory that he's moved the Greens into the territory that you would expect your party to own. So, you know, young voters, far left, very socially aware. There's not enough room for both the Greens and your party. And I don't know if Polanski was just trying to get under their skin, but he even publicly extended an invitation to Zara Sultana to join the Green Party. So I just think that the way things are, I see that battle going in favour of the Greens, and I worry that your party is just not going to go anywhere.
I mean, what's stopping them from joining the Greens then?
I'm not sure. You mean like in sense of a merger?
Yeah, a merger, or they're just join. I mean, Sultana is now an independent MP. Why can't she just switch over to the Greens? And same thing with Corbyn, that though he's not in office.
Yeah. I think when they started your party, the old leadership of the Greens was still there, and they saw themselves as more of a sort of attempt to recreate Labour as it should have been, in the hope that perhaps they could connect with the wider Labour movement. But the Greens have a kind of upper middle class kind of image. I don't think it's really fair anymore. I think that's been changing, but that's the image they have. So I'm not entirely sure why they didn't just join the Greens in the first place, but maybe if Zach Polanski had been in the leadership role at that point when they were being pushed out of the Labour Party, maybe they would have gone to the Greens, but for whatever reason they've elected to found their own party, and it does not look good.
And in my view, the role of Putin, political role internationally, is huge. And I mean, he's got Trump as an ally, actually, in that. And so it seems to me that I'm pretty sure Corbyn has, well, I know he's taken all that line about NATO is the fault of Russia invading Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure he has commented against British aid to Ukraine, as has Sultana. And so I'd just like to get your view on it. I mean, I think that's really important as far as the founding of your party or whatever it's to be called, you know, as opposed to the Greens, which does support Ukraine. What are your thoughts on that?
I get maybe that's a reason why these two groups can't just be merged into one. Maybe Ukraine is one of the reasons for that. It would be great to have Corbyn on our side because he does he does have a very positive image on the far left, even though he's not really on the far left. He's a sort of old school traditional centre left kind of politician, but he's very popular on the left broadly. Sultana, I had a lot of hope for Sultana early on in her career, but yeah, it's very disappointing to hear her saying the things that she's been saying about Ukraine. It unfortunately does resonate with a lot of people on the left in the UK. Certainly those who are involved in the kind of the more traditional party structures, groups like the Socialist Workers' Party and various others on the left have been very, very much opposed to giving Ukraine support, whereas a lot of more independent socialists and quite a lot of anarchists have been very pro-Ukraine. I don't know yet how your party will see the Ukraine situation. I mean, if Zara Sultana gets her way, and it's very much a members-based organisation where the members set the agenda, who knows what could happen. But if it's down to Sultana and Corbyn to set the agenda, as far as Ukraine's concerned, that would be bad news.
So let's talk a little bit about Scotland. And there's been that movement for Scottish independence. Where's that at now?
Well, in the most recent poll, there's about 11% undecided, and I think it's about 45% yes. So yes is ahead of no, but there would need to be 50 plus. It would need to be over 50% to get independence in a referendum. There's no sign that there will be a referendum anytime soon. But for yes to be ahead of no is significant, because no won in the last referendum by about 10%. So I think independence, it's dropped down the agenda quite a lot. The Scottish National Party have had a lot of problems internally and changes in leadership, and they have really kind of taken their focus off of independence for a while. And lots of other things have been happening that have meant that in the broader British context, Scottish independence hasn't really been discussed that much. But yeah, yes is nudged into the lead, so maybe it'll start to come back onto the agenda.
What's your view of the whole question?
I voted yes last time, and I would probably vote yes next time. It's a strange issue because it splits everybody. It's not like a class thing. It's not. I mean, I guess probably Scottish Catholics are probably more pro-independence than Scottish Protestants, but even then, it's split. There doesn't seem to be a particular group you can say definitely working class people vote for it, middle class will vote against, or whatever. It just seems to split everybody down the middle, every group. Except for there is a right-wing fringe in some working class Scottish Protestant communities that is very much pro-Britain. But other than that, it's kind of every constituency is there to be won.
So, and on that question of Ukraine, where do they fall on that?
I don't know if any polling has been done, but my impression is that Scotland in general is quite pro-Ukraine. The SNP is certainly pro-Ukraine, the Scottish National Party. I don't think there's any real representation in the Scottish Parliament for the negative view. There's one Reform guy in the Scottish Parliament, which I guess would probably be the one vote for Russia. The Scottish Green Party are very much supportive of Ukraine, as is the Liberal Democrats and Labour, and I think the Conservatives as well. So basically everybody in there, apart from that one individual, at least every party in there, apart from that one individual Reform person. There are a handful of independents. I don't know which way they go. But yeah, the Scottish Parliament is certainly supportive. So if they're any reflection on Scottish public opinion, then Scotland's quite supportive too.
The reason I keep asking about that is, to me, it's kind of a barometer of to what extent Putin is having an influence, but also Trump. And so that would be my other question: is in Scotland and then in the rest of Britain, how is Trump seen there?
Well, he certainly has supporters in Scotland, but again, I don't think there's any polling on this, but my impression is that Trump is not well liked in Scotland. Certainly when he visits, which he does with alarming regularity, I think we'd like to see less of him. He's always met with. Sorry.
I said we would like to see less of him.
Oh yeah. He's always met with protests, and the placards are always very humorous. The placards tend to get quite a lot of. They get shared a lot online, the placards. Now, I don't think he's very well received in Scotland. I think there's maybe a fairly decent sized minority in England who quite like him. I think in Scotland it's a much smaller minority. In terms of his influence on the Ukraine thing, as I said, every major party is solidly pro-Ukraine. Some of them, certainly the Conservative Party, there are some individuals who are fairly openly taking a more sceptical or not quite pro-Russian, but more of the view. Whenever something happens like the recent corruption scandal in Ukraine, it's the usual suspects sort of jump on the bandwagon and say, "Oh, should we really be spending all this money? Should we be doing this?" They'll always couch that in, of course, we need to support Ukraine, but there's corruption, and sort of weasel words. But
we need to support them, but not that much.
Yeah, which really is a way for them to start to decrease the support, because whatever the support comes down to, they'll try and push it further and further down. But the Conservative Party itself, as soon as it happened, they were pro-Ukraine, and they've actually remained pro-Ukraine, which has surprised me. So Putin and Trump might be having an effect on the British population. I don't know, but in terms of Britain's political parties, there's across the spectrum support for Ukraine, with the possible exception of Reform.
Just in conclusion, here in the United States, in my view, there's just been a huge vacuum that's developed, and it's been like decades in the making. And a lot of it has to do with the massive confusion in the working class and what I would call a crisis, a political crisis in the working class. Not so much because of the weakening of the unions, although that too, that's not so much what I'm referring to, but the consciousness and the degree of organization. And would you say that there's something comparable to that in Britain? Both, I know Scotland is a bit different, or at least that's my understanding, but in Scotland and also in Britain as a whole, and any further summary comments you'd like to make?
Well, in the UK, the working class left was very much connected to the post-war consensus that created the welfare state, the NHS, and so on. So its identity was very much wrapped around these things: unions, the NHS, and basically a kind of the whole sense of class solidarity was built around that. It wasn't radical, it wasn't revolutionary, but it was a pretty solid kind of solidarity. I think that has survived a little bit better in Scotland than it has in England, and maybe also survived better in Wales. Oddly enough, I think that's because of the different national identities that they have. So, in a weird kind of way, Scottish nationalism and a sort of quiet Scottish nationalism and a quiet Welsh nationalism have helped to maintain a degree of class solidarity that you don't really see so much in England anymore. I don't think the class solidarity in Scotland and Wales has remained the same. I think it's weak, but I do think it's maybe slightly stronger than it is in England. But Scottish politics, I'm not so sure about Wales, but Scottish politics has always, at least in my lifetime, been oppositional to whatever's happening in England. So if the Conservatives are doing very well in England, they do badly in Scotland. If Labour are doing very well in England, they start to lose support in Scotland. So Scotland was like a huge bastion of Labour support in the 1980s when the Conservatives were in power in England. And as soon as Labour got in 97, Scotland started to shift to the SNP. So Scotland's always sort of had it marches to the beat of its own drum, really. And its politics tend to be based on, yes, this sort of remnant of class solidarity, but also there's a suspicion that whoever's in government in London really doesn't care very much for Scotland.
If there's any further comments you'd like American workers to know, workers and socialists to know and think about?
Just that the working class in Scotland and Britain is still alive and kicking, and hopefully we can all push back against the demagogues that seem to be popping up all over the world now.